Hello there! Welcome back everyone to Void Dwarf Studios, where we continue our look into the Space Marine question, aka what makes a Space Marine? And in this episode we're going to look at the leadership, the HQ choice, your warriors who lead your Space Marine chapters or legions in battle. So, because of this, I'm going to first split the video into the Horus Heresy, and then move up towards the modern day chapter. As whilst we've talked about the organisation a little bit in previous videos, I just want to quickly dive into the various positions that you have when you're in a Space Marine Legion. So, starting off, the officer class of a Space Marine Legion back in the days of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy starts off with the Centurion. The Centurion rank is more or less the mid-tier officer class. This was a colloquial term, as Space Marine Legions often had different variations on what the rank of a Centurion was, but essentially you're in the middle of the hierarchy. A Centurion is also often known as a captain, or it could be a shield lieutenant. Essentially, the reason for all this is because each legion had different specialities for their Centurions, generically called consuls. Now, a consul is a specialized officer within a particular legion. This is your chaplains, psychers, your librarians, your forge lords, which are the precursor to the tech marine, vigilators, basically Space Marine assassins, and siege breakers, specialized Space Marines who specialize in, well, siege warfare. There are a number of specific consul choices, which depended on the different legions, and they're very varied, and I want to give them each their own due within their particular legion. But generically speaking, every legion centurion or consul had the following titles. You had your chaplain, who was the dude in charge of the spiritual well-being of the legion. These were implemented after the Council of Nicaea. Essentially, they were there to make sure that Space Marines remained loyal and, keep up their will, keep up their ability to fight in the harshest of conditions. They were also people who Space Marines could go to just talk about their fears and worries and, help invigorate them on the righteousness of their path. You had the good old Legion champion, who, he's a champion. He goes around killing things in single combat and tends to be a bodyguard for your Legion Praetor. You have a Master of Signal, who basically calls down orbital bombardment. And then you have a Moritat, a somewhat unofficial Astartes position. Essentially, a Moritat was an individual who goes behind enemy lines and, tends to assassinate things. A bit like a Vigilator, except a bit more bloody, up close and personal. And you also, of course, have the Primus Medicae, the precursor to the Apothecary, who was often employed in tactical squads to make sure that everyone, gets a nice little saving scalpel in case they have any wounds, or just to make sure that the gene seed gets recovered perfectly fine. You have your librarian, who, before the Council of Nicaea, basically were in charge of not only smashing people with psychic powers, but also for keeping Legion records. They were chroniclers, they were bookkeepers. They basically were there to make sure all the paperwork was done, but also record as many of their deeds as possible. In 2 of my Horus Heresy armies, I made extensive use of 3 different types of consul. The first one being my Forge Lord, who was in my Iron Hand army, little conversion I made there. Second was a chaplain from my Imperial Fists, which I wanted to make very much based on the First Company Templars. And then again, back to my Iron Hands, I had a Primus Medicae, because who doesn't love those extra feel no pains? The next rank up for our Centurion or Consul is that of Praetor. The Praetors were, these were the lords of the Space Marine Legions. They were considered the mitres to warriors, and many of them had been around since the very beginning of the Great Crusades. The only person higher up than them were the Primarchs themselves. Normally, these Praetors command the chapter-size formations within the legions, so each Praetor had the equivalent strength of 1,000 Marines, and basically within their chapters their word was law, unless the Primarch deemed otherwise. They have different titles such as Chapter Master, First Commanders, First Captain, and for the more radical Space Marine Legions there was Khan, Tribune, Wolf Lord, all sorts of names like that, but effectively these guys were in charge of the different chapters within a legion. And right now there's not much more to say about them. They are just bigger, better, badder Space Marines with even more badass fighting skills and general abilities. Typically, these are the dudes you want leading your army. I have a very fond attachment to my Iron Hand Praetor, as Thunderhammer plus servo arm to the face is quite hilarious. Now we start going into the 41st millennium, and this is where we get surrounded by, GW, so many lieutenants. So this is where Guilliman, when he returns, decides to organise the chapters a little bit differently. Whilst the chapter master and the captain still remain a valid rank, in addition to this he decided there needed to be a mid-tier rank, like in the days of the Great Crusade. So this is how we get the lieutenant. Essentially, the beginnings of the officer class for the new Space Marine chapters. Lieutenants tend to be armed with, pistols and blades, although you can give them a bolt gun if you so choose. Lieutenant's job is basically to stay close to the troops and relay commands between captains and chapter masters. It's an efficient form of communication. It just makes it easier for orders to be carried out and for there to be a more cohesive fighting force. But my god, has GW created so many Primaris Lieutenant models. Oy boy. None of them are bad, I just kind of think that GW need to try and do something a bit different, you know? Then you get to your captains and chapter masters. The captains are the next tier up. Basically, they tend to command companies, so your company of 100 Battle Brothers will be led by a captain. He'll have lieutenants underneath him, who will then relay the commands to the various sergeants. And above him, you still have a chapter master, who will be in charge of the whole operation, responsible for the lives of 1,000 Battle Brothers, and things in that sense have carried on more or less how they've always been. And captains and chapter masters basically do what they've always done. That is, to beat things over the head until they stop moving, preferably in close combat. This is why they will be armed with a specialised close combat weapon and some kind of fancy pistol. And their armour choice is really varied. In fact, all your Space Marine characters' armour choices are varied. The average Space Marine chapter can have captains in Terminator armour, or you can be armed with some of the new fancy armour that the Primaris bring with them, such as the Indomitus, the big gut belly armour as I like to call it. But you can kit these guys out in whatever way suits your tactics best. Hell, you can mount them on bikes if you want to. There's no problem with that there. But if a Space Marine captain or lieutenant or chapter master sees something unique in you, perhaps you are not destined to be a chapter master or rise up in the ranks as a line officer. Maybe you have a different set of skills that would be most beneficial for the chapter. And I'm going to start off with my favourite, the chaplain. The chaplain in the 41st millennium is relatively the same from the Horus Heresy. It is their job to ensure the spiritual safety and well-being of their battle brothers. The main difference being that in the 41st millennium there is a much more religious overtone compared to the Horus Heresy, where the chaplain was essentially there to make sure no one turns traitor. Fun fact, the reason why a 40k chaplain looks very different from the 30k chaplain is because when the Emperor was interred on the Golden Throne, all chaplains changed their helmets to mimic the skull-like face of the Emperor, essentially not only to mourn his death, but also to scare the bejesus out of everyone else. And yeah, it works. Skull faces are relatively terrifying. Whilst that is, of course, the job of a modern 40k chaplain, they have much more religious dogma weighing them down, rather than necessarily what's practical. And it depends what chapter you're in as to what kind of chaplain you're going to have. However, each chaplain basically is responsible for the culture. Basically, a chaplain will preach how amazing and awesome their Primarch was and how he was the best thing ever, and keep the culture of the chapter's homeworld as much as possible, along with their traits, traditions, martial prowess, specialities, all these kinds of things. And this is why when a chaplain from one chapter meets a chaplain from another, this can potentially cause problems. How do I put this? If you stuck an Ultramarine chaplain next to a Black Templar chaplain, you would radically start seeing some difference in dogma really fast, as well as their beliefs and spiritual practices. But it is also the chaplain's job to essentially keep records of the chapter's noble deeds, and to record them, and to make sure that everyone hears about them, just to show how awesome they are, taking some of the pressure off the librarians, as, depending on the chapter, depends on how much a librarian conclave is used, or encouraged for that matter. But a chaplain's true purpose, his true goal in life, is to be in the front lines, singing praises to the Emperor and bashing people over the head with the Crozius Arcanum, a stylized maul with a power field inside that basically just crumbles things to dust. I love chaplains, particularly for my Black Templars who are not Codex compliant. I don't care what the new Faith and Fury book claims, Black Templars do not give a rat's monkeys about chapter tactics or about Codex compliancy. It is a chaplain's job to inspire the men around him, and when you look literally like a Grim Reaper, skull-faced and all, smashing everything in your sight, and yelling abuse and praise to the Emperor as you go, yeah, most people get out of the way of a chaplain pretty damn fast. But sometimes even the chaplain's abuse, yells and prayers aren't enough to get a Space Marine back off of his feet when he's, well, had an arm severed off, or had his head caved in, for example. This is where you really need to go and speak to your apothecary. The apothecarium, or apothecaries as they are known, are the Space Marine medic. It is their job to ensure that the Space Marine gene seed always returns to the chapter if a Space Marine dies, and also to cultivate additional gene seed. In this way, they maintain the scientific purity of their chapter's gene stock, but also they assist in its spiritual purity, in a manner of speaking. The apothecariums are a unique branch of every chapter. If you display an interest in the biologist side of a Space Marine anatomy, then you will be selected by apothecary to basically become an apprentice. And due to the nature and severity of his job, he will more than likely be rushing towards the front of the combat as quickly as he can. It's just that he's not meant to be, right in the front lines. He's meant to make sure that his brothers don't fall. And Space Marine apothecaries, in addition to their battlefield roles, are also in charge for ensuring that the new recruits have equally pure gene stock. Apothecaries will also have various servitors around them who will assist in various medical procedures. It is far from uncommon for an apothecary to get a wounded Space Marine back to the chapter, and basically he will be responsible for grafting new cybernetic limbs onto the Astartes, and he'll have help via servitors and various other assistants. Typically speaking, the apothecary is trained away from the battlefield, as all apothecaries go through the same rigorous training that every battle brother goes through, in addition to their studies, and eventually you'll be given your specialized device known as a Narcisium. Essentially, this is your battlefield toolkit, which you use to get into the Space Marine's organs and try and fix whatever's damaged. The reason for that massive saw should be obvious, but it's because there's no way to get to the flesh of the Space Marine without first cutting into that armor. And this device is not only fantastic for battlefield medical roles, but if you punch someone in the face with this thing, yeah, they're gonna die. There's no real two ways about this. In addition to this, a apothecary carries an interesting concoction of various drugs and stimulants that will help a Space Marine prevent from death, but with the right adjustments can also be used to, poison enemies. This is not often employed, as apothecaries really are not meant to be right in the thick of it, typically standing back a little bit, whilst their brothers run in and get shot. But yeah, the apothecary is no slouch in close combat at all. They're used to having to punch people out of the way in order to get to their charges. And it is also the apothecarian's job to decide if a Space Marine is beyond saving. And if that is the case, they will deliver what is known as the Emperor's Piece, via a device known as the Reductor. Essentially a one-punch shot delivered from either a device attached to the Narcium or in the form of a Reductor pistol, straight through the skull, which should kill an Emperor's Astartes instantly. At this point, the apothecary will sigh and then gather both gene seeds inside of the Space Marine to ensure they return to the chapter to create new Marines. It is an extraordinarily dangerous position, but also a very honoured one. You literally carry the future of the chapter on your persons whenever you go into battle, and whenever you come off that battlefield with the gene seeds of the fallen, it is your job to ensure it returns to the chapter. So, we have our line officers, we have our spiritual support, we have our scientific support. How about a bit of magic, eh? Well, magic. How about a bit of psychic power? Your Librarian Conclave. Now, a Librarian Conclave is different depending upon what chapter you're in, so I'm going to just speak in broad terms. The Librarian Conclave is where your psychically gifted Space Marines will end up. If you're noted to have any form of psychic skill or power, or potential psychic power, then you will be taken under the wing of a Librarian, who will teach you in the various means to control your power, but also to channel it into various abilities. Psychic powers are quite random. It's very hard to train someone to learn a particular set of skills. They may simply just be unable to do it. However, on the whole, psychic powers do take relatively recognizable forms. Librarians can cast lightning, they can see the future to a limited extent, they can shoot fireballs, they can move the earth around them. They also are able to a certain extent, have a certain degree of precognition, and they can spread this effect to their various battle brothers to give them a little extra edge. Or they can use their abilities to make them invisible, they can use it to make things implode, blow up. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that psychic powers can do. So training a Librarian takes an awfully long period of time, partly because they're trying to figure out how on earth their power works, also how to use it in a sensible manner that can benefit the chapter. But off the battlefield, a Librarian's true purpose is to keep the chapter records. If Librarians get wiped out from the chapter, and the Librarian Conclave's library itself destroyed, oh boy, that is priceless information and artifacts that are kept within the Librarian, and you will not be able to ever replace them. It is literally the chapter's history that the Librarians look after. They are the keepers of this history, and they fiercely guard it. In addition to this, if a chaplain isn't around, a Librarian will often be used as a kind of diplomat between either other chapters or Imperial Guard armies, and they tend to have an ability where, well, Librarians make anyone feel nervous, because psychers make people feel nervous, which is helpful, but in addition to this, Librarians also tend to be a little bit more eloquent, shall we say, when it comes to talking to normal humans. Librarians have this wonderful device known as a psychic hood that helps them amplify and control their powers when they're in a battlefield condition. Because when you're trying to chant a mantra, which allows you to make a certain effect happen, and the last thing you want to be worrying about is demons trying to eat your brain, or you having a backlash and your brain gets fried. Yeah, there's all kinds of things to worry about if you're a Librarian. So this psychic hood just helps prevent some of the more worse scenarios from happening. In addition to this, a Librarian will often be armed with some kind of force weapon. This can take the form of a staff, an axe, a sword, and essentially it is a tool with which they can channel their psychic powers through. Think of it a little bit like a wizard's stick, you know? They can channel lightning through it, they can use it to help make their psychic powers work more effectively. It's a focus of sorts. Librarians, however, do have to be ever vigilant, because due to the nature of psychic powers coming from, well, chaotic entities, they have to be careful that they don't attract too much attention, because demons will always try and find a new means into the real world, and it's not unheard of for Librarians to become corrupted by chaotic powers because of their close connections to the warp. So people keep an eye on the Librarian Conclaves as much as possible. Right, we have almost covered all of our bases for the modern 40k chapter. We just have one more branch to look at. The Forge. Possibly my favourite branch, next to the Chaplain, of course. Which one's my favourite out of these two? Actually, that's a tough call. I may have to come back. Nah, I'm kidding. It's Chaplain. It must be Chaplain. But a close second are the Tech Marines. I love these guys. I love their servo harnesses. I love the aesthetic. I love their power axes. It's great. These guys are your combat mechanics. They will rush into battle and make sure that any vehicle that's been damaged will be repaired ASAP. And those servo arms are there to make sure that if anyone tries to stop him, the person's going to really regret their life choices. A tech marine is a space marine who, once has completed his training and is a fully fledged battle brother, if he develops an affinity for machines or has an interest and speak to his commanding officer, he may be sent to Mars, where he will be taught how to become a tech marine and the various rites and traditions of the Mechanicus. Once he's completed his training, he will come back to his chapter. Typically, his armor will be painted red in respect to the priests of Mars, and only his pauldron will remain unchanged, with the chapter symbol that he came from. A tech marine's job is, well, like I said, he's a battlefield mechanic. But it's more than that. The tech marine will maintain Terminator armor, he will maintain the dreadnoughts, tanks, vehicles, flyers. He will also maintain suits of armor for the average Astartes, and he will occasionally be responsible for producing new weapons and armor and techniques. He will have plenty of servitors around him who will assist him in his various tasks, and there are multiple tech marines, so he'll have plenty of help around. Tech marines often come armed with either a single servo arm, or they can have what I love, which is called a servo harness. The servo harness has multiple tools which allow him to complete his job more effectively, but in addition to this, it also has multiple weapons, including flamethrowers, melter guns, and in a pinch, a servo arm can punch almost as hard as a power fist. So yeah, anyone trying to stop him from repairing what he's doing, well, is gonna really regret this decision, as a tech marine will fight just as hard as any battle brother to make sure the vehicles are recovered and maintained. You do not want to get in the way of this angry mechanic. In addition to these servo arms, he tends to be armed with either some pistol and a power axe. So yeah, he's actually very good in close combat, surprisingly good in close combat in fact. And the only thing he really suffers from is a lack of invulnerable save, which, through relics in previous editions, were quite capable of making this not much of an issue. So, these are now all your HQ and officer choices completed, for both the Horus Heresy and 40k, the generic ones at least. I believe strongly that the more unique ones, such as the specialized chaplains for the Blood Angels, or the Forge Masters for the Iron Hands back in the Heresy, should really be kept into their own videos, because they deserve it. And I also think it's a nice way to encourage people to suggest different things for me to view in future videos. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this one. I just wanted to let you all know that I've started a Discord server. I'm still trying to figure out how best to use it, not gonna lie. But I'm hoping that some of you may join, we'll have a chat, get to know each other, and see what we can do for future projects. And if nothing else, share your hobby goodness, because it's nice to encourage people, you know? Spread the love and all that kind of jazz. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for subscribing and listening. Please share this with all your friends, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Take care, everyone.